So long a letter by Mariama Bâ 2. Continued Chapter 15 Asa 2. My dear friend, I've told you that there can be no possible comparison between you and young Naboo. But I also realize that there can be no possible comparison between young Naboo and Bina too. Young Naboo grew up beside her aunt, who had earmarked her as the spouse of her son Mordo. Used to seeing him, she let herself be drawn towards him, naturally, without any shock. His greying hair did not offend her. She found his thickening features reassuring. And then she loved, and still loved Mordo, even if their interests are not always the same. School had not left a strong mark on young Naboo, preceded and dominated as it was by the strength of character of Auntie Naboo, who, in her rage for vengeance, had left nothing to chance in the education she gave her niece. It was especially while telling folk tales, late at night under the starlit sky, that Auntie Naboo wielded her power over young Naboo's soul. Her expressive voice glorified the retributive violence of the warrior. Her expressive voice lamented the anxiety of the loved one, all submissive. She saluted the courage of the reckless. She stigmatized trickery, laziness, calumny. She demanded care of the orphan and respect for old age. Tales with animal characters, nostalgic songs kept young Naboo breathless. And slowly but surely, through the sheer force of repetition, the virtues and greatness of a race took root in this child. This kind of oral education, easily assimilated, full of charm, has the power to bring out the best in the adult mind, developed in its contact with it. Softness and generosity, docility and politeness, poise and tact, all these qualities made young Naboo pleasant. Mordo used to call her finicky, with a shrug of his shoulders. And then, young Naboo had a profession. She had no time to worry about her state of mind. In charge of frequent shifts at the Repose Mandel maternity home, on the outskirts of the crowded and badly serviced suburban areas, all day and several times over she would go through the same gestures engendering life. Babies passed again and again between her expert hands. She would come back from work railing at the lack of beds that led to the discharge, too early in her opinion, of the new mothers, worried about the lack of staff, inadequate instruments, medicines. She would say, with deep concern, "The fragile baby is let loose too quickly into a hygienically unsound social environment." She thought of the great rate of infant mortality, which nights of care and devotion cannot decrease. She thought, what a thrilling adventure it is to turn a baby into a healthy man. But how many mothers are able to accomplish that feat? In the midst of life, in the midst of poverty, in the midst of ugliness, young Naboo would often triumph with her knowledge and experience. But she sometimes knew her trending failure. She remained powerless, faced with the force of death. Young Naboo, responsible and aware, like you, like me. Even though she is not my friend, we often shared the same problems. She found life hard, and, being a fighter, had not the least inclination for frivolities. As for Bina too, she had grown up in complete liberty in an environment where survival was of the essence. Her mother was more concerned with putting the pot on the boil than with education. Beautiful, lively, kind-hearted, intelligent, Bina too had access to many of her friends' well-off families, and was sharply aware of what she was sacrificing by her marriage. A victim, she wanted to be the oppressor. Exiled in the world of adults, which was not her own, she wanted her prison gilded. Demanding, she tormented. Sold, she raised her price daily. What she renounced, those things which before used to be the sap of her life, and which she would bitterly enumerate, called for exorbitant compensations, which Naboo exhausted himself trying to provide. Echoes of her life would reach me, amplified or muted according to the visitor. The seductive power of mature age, of silvery temples, was unknown to Bina too, and Naboo would dye his hair every month. His waistline painfully restrained by old-fashioned trousers, Bina too would never miss a chance of laughing wickedly at him. Naboo would leave himself winded trying to imprison youth in its decline, which abandoned him on all sides. The graceless sag of a double chin, the gait hesitant and heavy at the slightest cool breeze. Gracefulness and beauty surrounded him. He was afraid of disappointing, and so that there would be no time for close scrutiny of him, he would create daily celebrations during which the bright young thing would move. An elf with slender arms who with a laugh could make life beautiful, or with a pout bring sadness. People talked of bewitchment. With determination, friends begged me to react. You are letting someone else pluck the fruits of your labor. Vehemently, they recommended marabouts, sure in their science, who had proved themselves, by bringing husbands back to the fold, by separating them from evil women. These charlatans lived far away. Casamance was mentioned, where the Diola and Murjago excel in magic philters. They suggested Lingir, the country of the Fulba, quick in vengeance through charms as through arms. They also talked of Mali, the country of the Bambara, with faces deeply scarred with tribal marks. To act as I was urged would have been to call myself into question. I was already reproaching myself for a weakness that had not prevented the degradation of my home. Was I to deny myself because Naboo had chosen another path? No, I would not give in to the pressure. My mind and my faith rejected supernatural power. They rejected this easy attraction, which kills any will to fight. I looked reality in the face. Reality had the face of Lady Mother-in-law, swallowing up double mouthfuls from the trough offered her. Her hunch about a gilded way of life was being proved right. Her unsteady heart, with zinc walls covered with magazine pages, where pin-ups and advertisements were placed side by side, had grown dim in her memory. One motion of her hand in her bathroom and delicious jets of hot water would massage her back. Another in the kitchen and ice cubes would cool the water in her glass. One more and a flame would spring from the gas cooker, and she would prepare herself a delicious omelette. The senior wife, hitherto neglected, Lady Mother-in-law, emerged from the shadows and took her unfaithful husband back in tow. She held valuable trump cards, grilled meats, roasted chicken and, why not, banknotes slipped into the pockets of the bamboo hanging in the bedroom. She no longer counted the cost of water bought from the jugular hawker of the vital liquid drawn from public springs. Having known poverty, she rejoiced in her new-found happiness. Naboo fulfilled her expectations. He would thoughtfully send her wads of notes to spend, and would offer her, after his trips abroad, jewelry and rich balbus. From then on, she joined the category of women with heavy bracelets lauded by the griots. Thrilled, she would listen to the radio transmitting songs dedicated to her. Her family reserved the best place for her during ceremonies and listened to her advice. When Naboo's large car dropped her and she emerged, there would be a rush of outstretched hands into which she placed banknotes. Reality was also Bina too, who went from nightclub to nightclub. She would arrive draped in a long, costly garment, a gold belt, a present from Naboo on the birth of their first child, shining round her waist. Her shoes stacked on the ground, announcing her presence. The waiters would move aside and bow respectfully in the hope of a royal tip. With a contemptuous look, she would eye those already seated. With a pout like that of a spoiled child, she would indicate to Naboo the table she had chosen. With a wave of her hand, like a magician, she would have various bottles lined up. She was showing off to the young people, and wanted to impress them with her form of success. Bina too, incontestably beautiful and desirable, bewitching, people admitted. But when the moment of admiration passed, she was the one who lowered her head at the sight of couples graced with nothing but their youth and rich in their happiness alone. The couples held each other or danced apart depending on the music, sometimes slow and coaxing, sometimes vigorous and wild. When the trumpet blared out, backed by the frenzy of the drums, the young dancers, excited and untiring, would stamp, jump and caper about, shouting their joy. Naboo would try to follow suit. The harsh lights betrayed him to the unpitying sarcasm of some of them, who called him a cradle snatcher. What did it matter? He had Bina in his arms. He was happy. Worn out, Bina would watch with a disillusioned eye the progress of her friends. The image of her life, which she had murdered, broke her heart. Sometimes also, despite my disapproval, Naboo would go to the nightclubs. Dress simply, she would appear in her fiancé's. She would arrive late on purpose so as to sit in full view of her father. It was a grotesque confrontation. On one side, an ill-assorted couple, on the other two well-matched people, and the evening created an extreme tension that opposed two former friends, a father and his daughter, a son-in-law and his father-in-law. Chapter 16. I was surviving. In addition to my former duties, I took over Naboo's as well. The purchase of basic foodstuffs kept me occupied at the end of every month. I made sure that I was never short of tomatoes or of oil, potatoes, or onions during those periods when they became rare in the markets. I stored bags of Siam rice, much loved by the Senegalese. My brain was taxed by new financial gymnastics. The last date for payment of electricity bills and of water rates demanded my attention. I was often the only woman in the queue. Replacing the locks and latches of broken doors, replacing broken windows was a bother, as well as looking for a plumber to deal with blocked sinks. My son Morderfall complained about burnt-out bulbs that needed replacement. Survived. I overcame my shyness at going alone to cinemas. I would take a seat with less and less embarrassment as the months went by. People stared at the middle-aged lady without a partner. I would feign indifference, while anger hammered against my nerves, and the tears I held back welled up behind my eyes. From the surprised looks, I gauged the slender liberty granted to women. The early shows at the cinema filled me with delight. They gave me the courage to meet the curious gaze of various people. They did not keep me away for long from my children. What a great distraction from distress is the cinema. Intellectual films, those with a message, sentimental films, detective films, comedies, thrillers, all these were my companions. I learned from them lessons of greatness, courage and perseverance. They deepened and widened my vision of the world. Thanks to their cultural value, the cinema, an inexpensive means of recreation, can thus give healthy pleasure. Survived. The more I thought about it, the more grateful I became to Naboo for having cut off all contact. I had the solution my children wanted, the break without having taken the initiative. The lie had not taken root. Naboo was excising me from his life, and was proving it by his unequivocal attitude. What do other husbands do? They wallow in indecision. They force themselves to be present, when neither their feelings nor their interests continue to reside. Nothing impresses them in their home. The wife all dressed up, the son full of tenderness, the meal tastefully served. They remain stolid, like marble. They wish only that the hours may pass rapidly. At night, feigning fatigue or illness, they snore deeply. How quick they are to greet the liberating daybreak, which puts an end to their torment. I was not deceived, therefore. I no longer interested Naboo, and I knew it. I was abandoned, a fluttering leaf that no hand dares to pick up, as my grandmother would have said. I faced up to the situation bravely. I carried out my duties. They filled the time and channeled my thoughts. But my loneliness would emerge at night, burdensome. One does not easily undo the tenuous ties that bind two people together during a journey fraught with hardship. I lived the proof of it, bringing back to life past scenes, past conversations. A common habit sprang up at their usual times. I missed dreadfully our nightly conversation. I missed our bursts of refreshing or understanding laughter. Like opium, I missed our daily consultations. I pitted myself against shadows. The wanderings of my thoughts chased away all sleep, else sidestepped my pain and refusal to fight it. The continuity of radio broadcasts was a great relief. I gave the radio the role of comforter. Night the music lulled my anxiety. I heard the message of old and new songs, which awakened hope. My sadness dissolved. With all the force I had, I called eagerly to another man to replace Naboo. Distressing awakenings succeeded the nights. My love for my children sustained me. They were a pillar. I owed them help and affection. Did Naboo appreciate, in its full measure, the void created by his absence in this house? Did Naboo attribute to me more energy than I had to shoulder the responsibility of my children? I adopted a sprightly tone to rouse my battalion. The coffee warmed the atmosphere, exuding its sweet fragrance. Foaming baths, mutual teasing and laughter. A new day and increased efforts. A new day, and waiting for what? It would not be easy to get my children to accept a new masculine presence. Having condemned their father, could they be tolerant towards another man? Besides, what man would have the courage to face 12 pairs of hostile eyes, which openly tear you apart? Waiting. But waiting for what? I was not divorced. One was abandoned. A fluttering leaf that no hand dares to pick up, as my grandmother would have said. Survived. I experienced the inadequacy of public transport. My children laughed at themselves in making this harsh discovery. One day, I heard Darba advise them, above all, don't let Mum know that it is stifling in those buses during the rush hours. I shed tears of joy and sadness together. Joy in being loved by my children, the sadness of a mother who does not have the means to change the course of events. I told you then, without any ulterior motive, of this painful aspect of our life, while Naboo's car drove Lady Mother-in-law to the four corners of town, and while Binatu streaked along the roads in an Alfa Romeo, dots sometimes white, sometimes red. I shall never forget your response, you, my sister, nor my joy and my surprise, when I was called to the Fiat agency, and was told to choose a car which you had paid for, in full. My children gave cries of joy when they learned of the approaching end of their tribulations, which remain the daily lot of a good many other students. Friendship has splendors that love knows not. It grows stronger when crossed, whereas obstacles kill love. Friendship resists time, which wearies and severs couples. It has heights unknown to love. You, the goldsmith's daughter, gave me your help while depriving yourself. And I learned to drive, stifling my fear. The narrow space between the wheel and the seat was mine. The flattened clutch glided in the gears. The brake reduced the forward thrust, and, to speed along, I had to step on the accelerator. I did not trust the accelerator. At the slightest pressure from my feet, the car lurched forward. My feet learned to dance over the pedals. Whenever I was discouraged, I would say, "Why should Binettu sit behind the wheel and not I?" I would tell myself, "Don't disappoint Asa too." I won this battle of nerves and sang Freud. I obtained my driving license, and told you about it. I told you. And now my children on the back seat of the cream-colored Fiat 125. Thanks to you, my children can look the affluent mother-in-law and the fragile child in the eye in the streets of the town. Modu, surprised, unbelieving, inquired into the source of the car. He never accepted the true story. Like Mordo's mother, he too believed that a goldsmith's daughter had no heart.